for the Onyx News. Extraterrestrials, time anomalies, dimensions, remote viewing, UFOs, UAPs, and USOs, ghostly encounters, abductions, Bigfoot, and more. Your end of the week news source for everything unexplained. Here is your host for the Onyx News Podcast, Margie Kay.
Hello and welcome to Onyx News. I'm your host, Margie Kay, and we are here every Friday at 6 p.m. Central, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. I'm glad you could join me this evening. We have a really good show for you. I do want to remind everyone that tomorrow is the day that we start the remote viewing workshop for 4 Saturdays in a row. If you're interested in learning how to remote view or improving your skills, this is going to happen for between 1 and 4 p.m. on each of the next 4 Saturdays. These are live programs, but you can watch it anytime on demand. So for more information, go to unxnetwork.com and you can find out all about it there and sign up by 11 o'clock tomorrow if you want to attend. My guest this evening is Mr. John Burroughs. The famous UAP sightings in Rendlesham Forest during Christmas of 1980 have been very well documented over the last 40 years, and several books have been written on the subject. The spin stops here, boring as it might be. The Condon Report, released in 2006, confirms that a phenomenon exists and should be studied further for weaponization. Everyone within the UAP community is waiting for confirmation. Well, guess what? Confirmation has happened because the military has figured out how to weaponize UAP technology. This new book by John Burroughs exposes how certain players manipulated witnesses and used the encounters to further their own goals and to cover up the truth of what really happened during those 3 nights in 1980. John Burroughs has written a very personal account and reveals details never published before of how the incident and events since have impacted his life. Welcome to the program, John.
Thanks for having me on.
Oh, I'm so glad you could join me. I have been wanting to get you on for some time, and it just worked out for this week, so I appreciate that very much. And congratulations on the new book.
Thank you.
How long did it take you to get that together?
Oh, I mean, the final stuff took about a year, but been working on it probably for 8 or 9 years, putting a bunch of stuff together, what happened, what was involved out in the fields outside Woodbridge Air Force Base.
Yes, and I think we should do an overview of what happened there to you, but I want to ask you a question first. Before that incident, which most people are familiar with, had you ever seen anything strange that you would call a UFO or UAP?
No, I was just 20 years old. Oh, actually, I would have been 19. I was going to be 20. No, I was 20 because it was 1980. Yeah, I was 20. And I was a typical young guy that was running around, working hard, playing hard. So I had no interest or never seen anything strange or had any interest in the topic whatsoever.
And how long had you been in the military at the time that this event occurred?
I came in March of 79, so it would have been just short of 2 years.
And what was your job?
I was law enforcement patrolman. So at that time in the Air Force, there were 2 career fields within security. It was called Security Police. Now it's called Security Forces. But back then it was Security Police, and it had security specialists and law enforcement specialists. And I was law enforcement. After I left England, I got into K9 too. So then I was law enforcement K9.
Okay. So you have quite a history. But this event, let's just, if you would mind, go ahead and walk us through what occurred.
Well, okay. Interestingly enough, and this is like some of what you'll get the people that were stationed there prior to the event during the event and even after the event. A lot of people will say there was weird stuff that had been going around the base for several months, maybe even several years prior to the main 3 nights. And that stuff never got the publicity. Ours did, because we went out 3 nights in a row, but also eventually a memo came out from the lieutenant colonel by the name of Colonel Halt that wrote a memo to the MOD. The MOD got the memo. There was stuff that went on with that, but it eventually got released by a FOIA, and then the News of the World covered the story. So I can do a shout out to everybody that's over the years came forward. There was stuff that happened prior to our event, and there was stuff that happened after. But for the purpose of the show, the 3 nights in question were, night 1 was our last midnight shift. We had come on duty. Our shift was 2300 to 0700. So we actually came on duty right at the end of Christmas night. And we went to work. About 0300 on the 26th, which is Boxing Day in the UK, I was riding around with my supervisor when he saw something in the sky coming down into the forest. I didn't see it coming down into the forest, but when he got my attention, I could see something strange in the forest. So at that point, we looked at each other. We were down by the gate, and it wasn't, and there's been people over the years that argue about this, but ultimately we decided, because it was close enough to the base, it was outside the fence line, but in the forest, and it appeared to be, moving somewhat towards the base, but it was still in the forest, that we should at least go down and take a look down the road. We left the gate and went down to the end of the road, where you were taking a left to go to Bentwaters, just to see what we wanted to do, if we wanted even to call it in. When we got down to the end of the road, I got out of the vehicle and everything seemed strange. There was like static electricity there. Things seemed to be like moving slower. Just didn't feel right. So at that point, jumped in the car. We took off back up to the gate. And at that point, we felt we had to at least let the desk know something weird was going on right outside the gate. We called the desk. They transferred it to CSC. They sent the security supervisor down to the gate, who had verified through CSC that he was seeing strange lights too. And a decision was made for him, his partner, and me to go out into the forest to try to see if we get a closer look, based on the fact that they were calling around after they were notified. CSC was notified, and radar system, different radar installations, and a couple of them actually saw something over the forest that went into the forest. So the shift commander on duty decided that we may have an aircraft that went down, and because it was so close to the base, they notified the British police and fire department, but that we should go ahead and go off base to see if we can figure out what was going on. From that point, we departed the base, went down into the forest. We finally got close to what was in the forest. We were seeing, there was like a white light, orangish red light, blue, green, and red lights all scattered in it. Early on, I said it looked somewhat like a Christmas light display to me. But as we got close to it, there was a bright light that went really bright. We hit the ground, it dimmed, and all I remember was being close to it. Then it got bright again and went up in the air and took off. The guy the airman that was with us, it was his first night in security. He's done an interview, and he said we got close to it, and then we blacked out. So whatever we had happen, he remembers us all blacking out. The security supervisor, he's the one with the story that said he got up, walked around it, touched it, got a binary download, wrote it all down in his notebook for 45 minutes. But whatever happened, we have different stories. So at that point, it did go up into the air, go back towards the coast. We got up, we went over, at least I remember getting up, and Ed remembers getting up. Penniston walked around it and all this other stuff. But we went out over a fence into the open field that's called the farmer's field. There's cottages down at the end of the first field. We walked through the field. As we were going over the fence, we could see like a light, a strange blue light or something down right above the cottage. Once we got down to the cottage, it was gone. In our statements, both Ed and I said at that point we saw a beacon, which is the beacon that this one guy in England tried to say that we followed the lighthouse, but he magically leaves out the fact that we had an encounter in the forest before we went into the field and got down by the cottages and saw the beacon. So we went towards the beacon, following the beacon to see what it was. And then we saw a blue light go across the sky. We got out towards the coast. At that point, we didn't see any more lights. We had lost radio contact, both when we were getting close to it the first time and while we were out in the fields going towards the coast. And finally, when we reestablished radio contact, they ordered us to return to base. So we came back to the base and met up with people waiting for us in an area just outside the back gate.
And who did you tell about this incident?
Well, there was the security flight chief was there. The law enforcement, my boss was there. The shift commander, I don't remember him coming. He didn't show up, but both flight chiefs were there. We talked a little bit about it. I vaguely remember that. But we went back, got some coffee. We were wet and cold. We had shift change. We went into the shift commander's office. At that point, he went ahead and we briefed him, or Penniston did basically. I just stood there and let him do the talking. Briefed him on what kind of took place. He confirmed that radar had seen something and something went down in the forest. And then at that point, we went ahead and were dismissed. And on the way home, we cut through the back way and we were told to go out to the area because there were some people out there looking at the area. That's where the pictures came of the tripods in the ground and like in a triangle and stuff. So we went back out there and took a look around, saw some damage to the trees above and some, branches and stuff on the floor. And we went home. I got up on Saturday morning. It felt like something to come back. Went up to the base right about shift change for midnight shift and found out something weird had happened that night. The shift commander was heading out to Woodbridge and had an encounter with the blue light that shut her vehicle off, and she got really upset and they relieved her of duty. So at that point, I went to the dorm after having breakfast, talked to a couple of guys I worked with on flight that were on duty with me the first night, weren't out there, and we decided to go back there on night 3. So, it ended up being night 3 because when we got out there, we didn't know anything about there was going to be people out there, including Colonel Hall. So when we got out there, they were out there. Eventually, I met up with Hall. All 3 of us did. 2 of them stayed back, and I met with Hall and his party. And myself and Adrian Bustenza went forward when a light appeared in the distance and started moving towards us. And then eventually we started running towards it, and it seemed like it was coming towards us. And what I remember then is Adrian somehow went to the ground, but he said something knocked him and held him. And then I just remember getting close to it. But at that point, that's all I remember, and it was gone. But Adrian's the one that said he saw it come over me, and I disappeared. And then at that point, I reappeared, and then whatever it was went up and went back out over the coast. So,
wow.
So that's night 3. From that point, we were told on Monday when I went back to work, I was put on the back gate, and they brought a team in to look in the forest, and a bunch of stuff was going on. But Monday, I was told I had to write a statement, which I did, and all 3 of us went and saw first Colonel Hall on Tuesday, then to Colonel Conrad's office, then to Colonel Williams, who was the wing commander, and basically, again, turned in our statements, and Penniston, who was the senior guy, did most of the talking. That's as far as I remember ever being talked to at that point or anything else. Other people claimed they were interrogated, threatened, and everything else.
Did anybody tell you not to speak of this?
Well, when we were in there, especially with Williams, Hall, Williams, and Conrad all said that they were looking into it. It was being looked into, what happened. They didn't really say what they knew. They just implied they were looking. It was being investigated, and that if they had any questions, they would, we would be brought in, as far as asked to come in and answer the questions. But I mean, that's as far as that went with me. I mean, as far as at that point, I just went on my way. I just didn't know what happened. I couldn't explain it, and I didn't really care. I mean, and what I mean by not caring was I was kind of told to leave it alone. You know what I mean? Not directly like, we're ordering you can never speak about this. Mm-hmm. But it was more like, we're taking care of it. If we need something, we'll let you know, go back to work, and, don't worry about it. So.
Yeah, don't worry about it. Okay. That seems like it'd be a little bit difficult to do. Do you happen to know if any of the civilians in the area, like the farm or the cottage or anybody, were there other witnesses?
Oh yeah, it was seen by numerous people in, British people. There's been different documentaries done on it where different people have talked about what they saw. There was stuff seen up the coast a little bit that was going towards Bentwaters. So it wasn't just, there was people asked how many people probably knew about it. Well, 2 different flights, and plus on the third night, the flight that was on, the swing shift flight, stayed over. So there was, 80 to 100 people that either directly were involved or indirectly by listening to what was going on. And I think basically there was at least 10 to 12 civilians that have openly talked about what they saw, outside of the base itself, different things were flying around and going on all 3 nights. So there were different people that saw strange things all 3 nights, not just on night 1 or night 3. So.
Got a question from the chat from James. Were there any radiation traces at the landing site?
Well, that's been debated. On night 3, Colonel Halt, there's a tape that, if people aren't aware of it, that he actually had a little recorder, and he was recording stuff as it was happening. It's pretty wild to listen to some of it. But at one point, they were out there with one of the guys from disaster preparedness, and according to them, there were readings that were above background radiation. I mean, I wasn't there. I know that it's on the tape, and I know that's what they've claimed. So there was traces, I call it, because I'm not sure the levels of radiation in the area where the depressions were found and the damage to the trees. I know that much.
Were there burn marks on the trees?
If I remember right, yeah, I think they did say there were burn marks on the trees that night. So they saw them with the flashlight. It's on the tape. If you listen to the tape, they're describing the actual readings they're taking and then what they're seeing on the trees. I think, if I remember right, they actually said there was some sap coming out of the trees. But again, I haven't listened to the tape for a few years. So.
I've done a number of investigations where there were landings or close calls, maybe not landed on the ground, but very close. And I've found trace evidence years later, up to a year later or longer at the site. There will be anomalous EMF readings and maybe radiation readings. Do you know if any testing has been done recently on that site?
Well, in 2010, well, first of all, the forest itself, this is always, it happened the way it did. So it sounds like a conspiracy, but it wasn't too long afterwards. I know I left in 81. I can't remember what year it was, 82, whatever. Shortly after I departed, they had what they called a hurricane come in, and it leveled that whole forest right where we were. The whole area was, I'm talking about when they say leveled, it was leveled. The trees were completely all taken down. And there's reports of people prior to that happening. It happened. I mean, there's actually, you go back and look, at least there used to be, where the weather people were warning it was going to happen. But there was reports that people saw the logging trucks staged before the warnings actually came out and the storm happened. But they quickly cleared the entire forest out, that whole area where our stuff happened. So take it for what you want, but the forest was destroyed and it was removed. Now, in 2010, I went over there for the 30th, and there was an engineer that came down. He lived up in Wales, I believe it is, or it's north of, somewhere close to Scotland. And he came down and brought equipment down, and actually we recorded anomalies in the area on his infrared equipment. And there were EM readings, strong, high-level EM readings in that area. Mm-hmm. So there's been stuff seen there ever since. So, and before, like I said, there's been stuff that was seen by civilians and military people prior to our event, and stuff up almost to modern day. I think people stopped going out there since COVID, pretty much. That kind of slowed it all down for a while. But yeah, there's strange stuff that's happened there to modern day. So, so.
Got a question from Carl. I am a USAF SP veteran. Did the incident affect your status with the Air Force?
Well, The only thing that really affected me in my career was when the News of the World came out. I was on my third assignment already, and I was on a base of preference. And you were guaranteed 2 years because I just re-enlisted, and you were guaranteed 2 years. Well, orders came down in that spring, and I hadn't even been there 2 years for me to leave the day my contract would have had to stay active. In other words, if they tried to move me before my contract, the 2 years I could have avoided my contract and gotten out. So the day I was eligible to leave, they had me leaving and going to Korea. Now that all happened right when News of the World hit, and they wanted to keep me. Well, I ended up not knowing at the time, but I found out later. Colonel Hart was over in Korea with me at Kunsan. I was at Osan. General Williams, he now became a general, was in charge of PACAF. And CNN tried to track us down over there, but couldn't get a visa to come in because you had to have a visa to come into Korea or into the Philippines, and they weren't allowed to track us down to interview us. So it's pretty clear they hit us over there to keep, once the story broke, to keep us from, having people try to track us down. So.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. James says, how many additional craft were seen after this incident? And have there been any since the base closed that you know of?
Well, I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but I've never really heard much of craft. I've heard of strange lights that have been seen in the area. Now, there could be somebody out there that saw what they thought was a craft, but most of the people I've always heard talk about it, civilians, or what we saw, other than what Penniston said, there was a triangular craft that he walked around. There's been very little talk about crafts, but just different types of lights, including I did an interview on when I used to do Phenomena Radio. I did an interview with the guy in the tower at the WSA. There was actually a dome that came down over the forest where we were, and there were blue lights coming out of it. So there was like a big orangish dome that came down and covered the area where we were. And that would have been on night 3 when Adrian and I were going out into the forest.
Sounds like a pretty big dome.
I didn't see the dome. I was on the ground, but yeah, he made it sound. I believe if I go back and listen to the interview, he did describe how big it appeared from the tower at Bentwaters. So it was a big dome. Yes.
Wow. Did you have any lasting physical effects after this incident?
Well, that turned into the next thing. As far as it really didn't affect my career, I'd retired by then. But as far as I got sick right afterwards, and they didn't really know what it was. But then when I returned to the States in this early summer, I got really sick one night. I only lived about 2 hours. My parents lived about 2 hours from Indiana, where I was stationed. So I'd go back periodically and visit them on my days off. Well, I went back on a Saturday. I had Saturday and Sunday off, and I got really sick Saturday night. So sick, I knew I wasn't going to be able to get back Sunday night. So I called the base, and they said, go to the emergency room so they'll verify you're sick, which I did. At that point, the doctor there asked me about my heart murmur, and he said it was really loud, and he was concerned with it. And I said, well, I don't know anything about it. I don't have a heart murmur. He goes, well, yeah, you do. So he brought some people in. He was showing them letting them hear what it sounded like and everything. So I went back to the base, showed back up on Monday with the stuff from the ER and stuff. And they brought a doctor in the next day from Wright-Patterson, which at the time I didn't know the implications of Wright-Patterson with this kind of stuff. So he came in and evaluated me and immediately had me go on orders to go up on Wednesday to have a whole bunch of tests done, which they did. And he figured out what the heart problem was. At first, he thought I was going to have surgery, and I didn't. So then he said, well, we'll monitor it. And I went on my way. So then later, I started having really bad vision problems. I had a little bit before, but my eyes started really bugging out and acting weird. So at that point, I went and I ended up at Wilford Hall. And it was interesting at the time, the doctor, he was a colonel. It wasn't regular an eye doctor, it was a specialist. He looked at my eyes and said that, have you been exposed to radiation? And I'm like, not that I'm aware of.
Thyroid.
At the time, I had no idea about what we were encountered in the forest, other than I couldn't explain it and I could describe what I saw. But so it affected my eyes and my heart, which eventually led to when I got really sick, in 2010, 11, my civilian doctors wanted to see, because they couldn't figure out what I was having issues with. The symptoms didn't match what they could see the damage was, what they could understand. So they wanted to see what the initial test showed. And that's when it turned into the Air Force denied access to my medical records. And they even went as far as denying I was even in between 79 and 82, because I eventually had a senator involved in it, and they figured out my records were classified because they weren't where they belonged. So at that point, she had me go file for disability, which would force them to review my medical case. And I went in, and the doctor that was asking me what was going on looked at me and said, well, what you're telling me is it can't be possible you weren't in the Air Force. So I got denied by the VA for my claim because they said I wasn't in, nor did they have any medical records. Eventually, we got that straightened out where I could.
Okay, John, I'm gonna stop you there because we've got to take a break, and when we come back, I'm gonna let you finish that thought. Okay. This is Margie Kay. We'll be back right after these messages. Are you thinking about purchasing a wood-fired heating or cooking appliance but don't know where to start? The new book, Wood-Fired Heating and Cooking, will guide you through the process and make the decision much easier. Find out about wood stoves, wood-burning fireplace inserts, masonry heaters, cook stoves, brick ovens, and more. Learn about operation and maintenance, buying and storing wood, even how to make your own charcoal. A bonus section includes delicious recipes for cooking in a wood-burning oven, grill, tandoori oven, or smoker. The wise homeowner, prepper, or homesteader will have the ability to heat their home with wood when the power goes out or to save money on increasing gas bills. Wood-Fired Heating and Cooking is available at Amazon. Visit www.woodfiredpub.com for more information. That's woodfiredpub.com. My book, The Kansas City UFO Flaps, covers cases that have occurred in Kansas City over the years. Kansas City has long been a UFO hotspot since before the year 1900. I cover many of these cases, starting with the airships in 1897. I cover a lot of cases and speak with actual witnesses. You'll see photos of UFOs and find out why this may be happening in Kansas City. And what is creating portals that could create interdimensional openings. Read about the events that we've held in Kansas City to discuss this and more. Visit unxmedia.com for more information. The book is available at Amazon. We're back with the next news. I'm your host, Margie Kay, and this evening we are speaking with John Burroughs. John, before the break, you were talking about your being denied by the VA, and they said you were not in the Air Force. So how did that turn out?
Well, when it was Senator Kyle started with the whole thing, and the Air Force, it had to come from the Air Force, but they released some of my records, and from 79 to 82, it was all clean. There was nothing showing I was in the military from 79 to 82 that they released. They themselves supplied a DD Form 214 that showed in 1982. That was when I re-enlisted to end up going to Luke, where they then moved me. But they didn't give any DD Form 214s other than that one, and that's what they stuck their feet into the ground and said, nope, you weren't in 79 until 82. Even if you look at the document carefully, it showed that it was a reenlistment that led to me coming in 79. We actually had a couple of pay records because some of the stuff that did get released, it didn't show me at Bentwaters, but it showed me coming in with pay records. Showed an entry physical, which showed no heart damage whatsoever. And then my exit physical, it showed that I had major heart issues getting out active duty in 88. But they stuck to it. They just flat out dug their heels in and said, you weren't in. And then they said, we have no medical records that we are going to give up or release on you at all. So not only did they not give up records from 79 to 82, they just didn't give up any of my medical records. So at that point, by that time, Senator McCain was in the middle of it. When we were able to prove eventually that I was in 79, that's when they just said, drop the appeal that we were already involved with. Because when we appealed it, we got access to some of what they were doing, and they actually had held back like 400 pages of documents from our FOIA that the senator's office had requested directly. So they were holding back documents that legally belonged to me. Mm-hmm. They caught them on that. When we actually challenged them on that, they didn't answer it. And they're also, we found out through the state agency that was helping with the appeal originally, there is a classified records section, but they wouldn't even acknowledge whether my records were classified. So once we got proof to them that I was in, they said, withdraw the claim, the appeal, and we'll reconsider your case. And the aide, Cheryl Bennett, thought that at that point I was going to get my settlement and get taken care of. Well, magically, once I withdrew my claim, they came back and said, thank you for drawing your claim. Your case is closed. And
wow. At
that point, then it got ugly because the Department of Justice got brought into it. The Inspector General and Senator McCain himself got personally involved. It's not that he wasn't involved before, but he personally got involved with it to include threatening to open up hearings on the Rendlesham incident itself. Mm-hmm. So eventually down the road, I think it was like 4 or 5 months later, they eventually acknowledged I was in, and they acknowledged that what happened at Rendlesham, that I was injured in the line of duty during the event. And they not only took care of me medically, but they granted me disability for the incident. And at that point, moving forward though, within the VA, you can do a lot of things, but when it comes to my heart and my eyes, I can only be seen by VA doctors. And I've never, ever had access to any of my medical records, ever. And only these certain doctors can treat my heart. So at the end of the day, people say that's not legal. Well, actually it is. If you're involved in classified, whatever, something that's been classified, mm-hmm. they can actually classify that part of it, and you can have no access to it. So.
Do you feel confident in these doctors' abilities?
Well, the problem with the VA is that if you live in a bigger area, like a metropolitan area, they'll usually have more treatment there, like more doctors and stuff. Where I'm at in Illinois, I have to either drive to Indianapolis, which is 2.5 hours away, or Danville does have cardiology there, but they can't keep doctors on staff. So what happens is they have to go to Indianapolis, which actually the chief of cardiology handles anything that has to do with my heart directly anyway, if something's recommended. And I can't do community in the care. So I got sick a year ago with COVID. And you know how after you get COVID, if you're in the hospital, they want to do an echo on your heart. The VA would not authorize the hospital to do an echo.
Oh my goodness.
I had to go back down to Danville and have the echo done by the VA.
Oh my goodness.
So whatever it has to do with my heart, my eyes, I can't to this day have any civilian doctors be involved with it. So
I've got another question from the chat. Have you had episodes of missing time since your retirement from the service?
There was no missing time after I got out, but what the book we go into this, and we're even digging deeper into it now where we're discovering more and more stuff. What probably happened to us, and the first night our watches were 45 minutes slow when we came back and met up with the people, was we experienced time dilation bubble, which was being created by the actual technology they were working on and creating outside the back gate at these facilities that were close to the base. And probably there is actually, because I never really got into it, there is an actual real phenomenon there that's in the ground that the British government's aware of. They were studying it at the time of our incident. There was some people down there. The guy always gets mad, but it was funded through the government, through his university. So they were down there studying the phenomenon. So not only that, but the people down there, the military people down there, the Marconi and stuff, were working on the phenomenon itself, figuring out how to utilize it for weaponization.
Are you saying that there is a portal of sorts there at that site?
Well, if you go into, this is where it gets pretty heavy. If you go into the DIA papers that were released to McCain's committee, which is interesting enough, I didn't even go into this part yet, where I had some people show up towards the end when I was getting really sick and helped move some of this forward with knowledge of what happened. But if you go into these papers that they then went to McCain to get funding for exotic technology development, that yes, that this particular phenomenon, which is what they call a UAP, which is different than what a standard UFO is this UAP can, based off of what we can create now, even back then, and what it creates itself, can do that kind of stuff, to include creating like a time dilation bubble, which people that don't understand that doesn't mean you're time traveling. You're just slowing down in the timeline you're in. Mm-hmm. You're actually when you're in that, the time what's taking effect inside the bubble is different than what's going on outside around you.
Did you have any, at the time the incident occurred, originally, did you have any experiences with time anomalies?
Me personally?
Yeah.
No, nothing that I ever remembered, before when this all stuff happened, that particular 3 days, or 2 of the 3 days I was involved with. I will say that when I was in Sedona, when I lived there for a couple of years, anybody's familiar with the area, there's a place out there called Bradshaw Ranch. And that's pretty much just like Skinwalker.
Yeah.
And I was out there one particular night. I don't want to say I was being tested, but it appears afterwards it looked like I was being tested. But when I was out there with a couple people, including one person that had access to some stuff and worked in the government at one point, some weird stuff did happen, including some lights and different things happened. So, that area, if you ever want a shot at going somewhere and possibly really seeing something like a UAP or whatever, there's a good chance if you're up there in Sedona, you might see something on a good clear night. So.
I've remote viewed that location for several people who lived there, and then some investigators since. And I do see a portal where it's an interdimensional portal where things are coming in and out. And they're affecting machinery too. And the whole thing is just bizarre. Got a question. What does he think about Penniston's claim about touching the craft and having ones and zeros downloaded from the craft?
Figured I'd get that question.
Yeah.
Here's how I'm going to leave it. Okay. I never saw any of what he said take place. All right. Now, over the years, he's gone as far as, first he's tried to say Ed wasn't even with us. He was back at the vehicle. But recently he actually admitted in an interview that Ed was with us. And Ed always remembered being with us, but neither him or I saw what he said happen. Okay. So that part, I didn't see it happen, nor have I always struggled with how could he be walking around this calmly, touching it and writing notes. But if you want to believe it's what he said happened, go for it. But I have issues with that. And then the binary is just another whole debacle. There's people out there trying to run a front for him, but I was involved with it when it first showed up. Never talked about it until the 30-year anniversary overall. And what I mean by talked about it was he made it available to Prometheus Entertainments, which was doing Ancient Aliens, which it fell perfectly in their purview of covering that stuff. So he'd always said no one had seen it before because it was a loose leaf notebook and he kept it out. But magically, when we came to shoot this particular show, he had it in there for them to see it. So that all happened. So they saw it, they analyzed it, but there's been misreputations on that because honestly, the codes that they come up with, you have to put a decimal point at a certain point. It's not like It just run this code and that's what comes up. You have to identify it with the decimal point. But if you put the decimal point in a different spot, there's other areas that show up. You see what I'm getting at?
Mm-hmm.
But these particular sites that come up were actually found by an investigator on an ancient website that was available 3 years prior to when he showed the notebook and showed the binary code. So these are just some of the issues that you can have with it, because there's just something that doesn't add up with it. Never mind the fact the notebook never showed up till the 20-year anniversary. And we did a filming. I went over to England with him and Halt for Strange But True, and he never brought the notebook up then at all after he just gotten out, or anything about the glyphs or the binary. And then he didn't bring up the binary till the 30-year mark, right before we went over to England. So you want to do your own research, you want to believe it, go for it. Am I skeptical about it? Yes, I am.
All right, let's talk about your new book. What is in it?
Well, that's where we deep dive. There's a guy by the name of Win Keach that writes a chapter that was he lives in the UK, like I said. He's an engineer. He came down and we went around the facilities and looked at the area. He had his equipment. He was there in 10, and he came back in 18 and met with me. And he writes a chapter about a bunch of different things that he felt were important to the case, including his readings with his equipment, both in 10 and 18, and there were still anomalies there. Took some pictures in 18 where it shows some anomalies. And one of the things that I find interesting, and I'm not an expert on this, so if I'm wrong, I'm wrong as far as if I don't get it exactly right. The newer cameras have the technology that can pick this stuff up better, just like the military can now pick it up better with their sensors and stuff.
Yes.
So it's becoming more prevalent. Now, doesn't mean that there's never lens flare or other stuff, but this particular camera he says didn't show that, which it didn't appear to. And it showed some weird anomalies when we were out there looking around on the second time, never mind what he picked up on infrared the first time, where there was anomalies, blue lights and a red light and stuff, and weird stuff going on. So this area seems to be active. It has EM frequencies and stuff. It's in an area where there's a burial ground and ley lines. So and never mind the fact that they had top secret facilities out there, a radar site that was a site that was used for that kind of stuff. They developed the death ray and the radar in that area in the first place, but they were working on stuff, including Martlesham Heath, which at the time of our event was a joint British-American facility. But then when the Americans closed Bentwaters and Woodbridge, they gave the facility over to the British, or they closed down their side of it. So there was all kinds of stuff being tested on, going on. Andrew Pike wrote a book about his involvement with the testing of the phenomenon, including he talked to me about how at the time of our event, they were provoking the phenomenon itself, trying to figure out what they could learn from it and weaponize it from. So this UAP thing that's interesting is the fact that it may be different than the UFO thing was always the aliens are human, in physical form. They're going to eat us. They're going to blow us up. UAP seem to be more of Project Condign, which is something that helped me with my case, talks about what a UAP is, talks about time dilation portals and stuff like that. And it goes into, how they can weaponize it or should weaponize it. So this may be separate from some of the stuff that involves, more of a hardened craft. But at the same time, though, most people, and I didn't know this at the time, because I'm just like people nowadays that say they have something. Well, it can't be ours. Well, at the time, a lot of what took place can be explained by declassified documents now to some of the technology that we're working on. And the phenomenon itself, where they could create their own plasmas and provoke it to have a plasma, have it show itself in a plasma form, because the Condign report says it's real and it's intelligent and it's able to do things that can't be explained.
Has there ever been a case in that location where someone disappeared and didn't come back?
I've never heard that, but I do know this, that when I was there in 2010, there was these two little old ladies that came in. They didn't come the night before we did this conference, but we were wrapping up filming before we were going to leave the UK the next day. And they came in looking for me, and they sat down with me in the conference. We were like in a little conference room area and they were filming in another one. And they came in and started talking to me. And the lady that brought the other lady in said this particular lady, she verified it, she worked at the high school at the time of the events and she went out there with the science teacher that Halt knew to look at the area. But she said there was a house that disappeared out there.
A house disappeared.
That's what she said. Yes. Unfortunately, I had to leave to go finish my filming. And by the time I came back, she was gone. So I never was able to find out exactly where the house, but it was between Bentwaters and Woodbridge, she said, and the house disappeared. And people can say what they want, but she just didn't seem like the type of person that was struggling walking on a cane that would come out in the cold of the winter to meet with me to tell me that. She really, her story was was believable that it happened. But unfortunately, I had to go finish the film shoot. When I came back, she was gone. So.
Well, that's a heck of a story. That's not the first time I've heard that.
Right.
But it's pretty unusual.
Right.
And then I often wonder if some of these missing people aren't, if something as strange as happening, like a portal opening and they go into another dimension and don't come back. So that's why I asked that. How can people get a hold of your book?
It's available on Amazon.
Okay.
So it's just, You can just go to Amazon. You can get it on Kindle or they'll send you a paperback copy.
So since this incident occurred, your initial incident, have you had any since?
Well, like I said, some weird stuff happened in Sedona when I was out there one night where stuff was in the sky and around us and stuff like that. So
balls of light?
Well, there was lights in the distance that the person who had the camera took it and saw it afterwards. They were triangular objects. And there was a light above us that was going counterclockwise in different colors. It was kind of bizarre. I didn't see it with the naked eye, but could see it on film. It was recorded. A small video was made of it. And then there were strange lights in the sky flying around, and the camera showed actual triangular type objects. So.
Did you use night vision cameras?
Well, I don't know what they were using, but it was a high-end camera. So, You know what I'm saying? I can't give you the model and everything else, but it was top-of-the-line camera. So,
have any of the other men who were involved at that initial incident, have they had health problems as well?
Well, the guy that was with me on night 3, Adrian Bustenza, he got his injuries approved through the VA too. So both him and I are rated, and they've acknowledged that we were injured during the event. So yeah, there was one other person that, I can confirm that was with me on night 3 that got close to it too, that got compensated for what happened. So.
I'm sure you've heard this question a lot, but do you think we're ever going to have full disclosure from the government?
No.
I knew that was going to be the answer.
I'll tell you why, guys. It's simple, okay? I've done presentations and talked about this. Just a little bit in the book. What you've gotten is confirmation that something's going on. They actually, if you listen to Robert Bigelow, he started with an interview he did with George Knapp a few years ago. Then he went on 60 Minutes. And I would love to just sit down with him and ask him to explain what he means by they're among us, they're here. What is they? What are they doing and everything else? But no one's that I'm aware of. They didn't follow up with it in 60 Minutes. And I know Knapp's never asked him. So I would assume that most likely he won't, because probably Bigelow's made that out of bounds, because all these guys that are handling all this stuff are doing a script. They're running a script and a narrative that are trying to benefit them. So, but at the end of the day, ultimately, the government's not going to divulge what they know about it to include the fact that they're weaponizing it because they wouldn't want any other government to know what we have and how we have it. They may leak things out to make the other governments be concerned or try to compete with whatever they're seeing because they may believe it's ours or whatever. Never mind the fact they're manipulating Congress and getting them to say that, well, whatever it is, we have to get funding for it to understand it and weaponize it because we definitely can't let the Chinese and the Russians get it. So
Sure.
the fact that just forget about whether there's alien people among us or whatever, they're never going to divulge what they know just from the weaponization part of it. That's why the book was called Weaponization of the UAP.
Do you believe that weapons have already been developed that use technology?
Yeah, there's a good saying. It's a good saying. We may not have an ET craft in a hangar, but we've got terrestrial technology in a hangar that's been developed off of UAP technology.
Yeah.
They clearly have studied it and worked on it. I've been around these guys. I've been around these physicists. I've been around in all this. I know that they have stuff. Never mind, the book shows. In the book, we go to declassified documents and stuff that shows the technology and everything else. And as you know, on your network, UNX, we're doing a show right now where we're going to completely deliver what exactly has been developed and how it's been developed as we go along.
Yeah, and let's definitely tell us about the Phenomenon Radio Show.
It's a show that I did one earlier, and I got out of it for a while. I had health issues and stuff, and I felt it had run its course because one of the things that I feel is that there's a limited amount of people you can talk to. And what I mean by that, everybody wants the same people. They want Lou Elizondo. They want these same people.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so many podcasts and shows now that try to cover the same stuff. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to do a series of like shows that show the history of it going forward, how the weapons have been developed, what's going on as we go forward, the people that were involved in it and everything else. And then after we put each of these mini series together, then we go on and talk about them and, kind of reference why we did the show. And eventually we hope to get a few guests on that can expand on it, like some science people and stuff. We're nothing against the people that have had experiences and stuff, but they'll tell their story on 20 different shows. Our idea is to go back and look at all the stuff that's been said, the declassified documents, and put it into a series that people can follow and even go back and reference on how this has all happened and where it's going.
And who else is involved with you on the show?
Well, obviously, Race Hobbs is the narrator and the host. James Warrow, who's a researcher from the UK that I've worked with, and he worked with on the book. And then a guy that popped in late, but he's been great. His name is Simon Holland. He actually he did all kinds of documentaries and stuff for the BBC and a bunch of mainstream stuff. So he's been working with us and helping us on this too. So.
Awesome. I listened to the whole show last night. I stayed up late and it was fantastic. So I'm glad you're on the network with us, and thank you to Race as well.
Look here, I just got to pop in real quick. I hope my mic is not cracking out, but
nope, it's good.
Tonight, following UNX Network, we're going to do a remastered classic tonight, this week, and it will be with James Warrow, who he just mentioned, our researcher team member in the UK, and Ronnie Dugdale from a 2016 show that we did that really taps into just about everything we're working on from that point to this point right now, moving forward. So the weaponization of UAP is the conversation, and you don't want to miss it. It's going to be really good. And I love you, John Burroughs. And I love you, Margie. Thank y'all for letting me be a part of this stuff.
Well, you're awesome, Race.
Thank you, Race. And Race is awesome, and he does a fantastic job on that program and with all of our shows here on the UNX Network. John, thank you so much for being on the program with me this evening. I wish we had more time, but we've got to move on so that we can listen to the Phenomenon Radio Show coming up next.
Well, thank you, Margie. And maybe down the road you could, as we advance this, I can come back on, or you can bring a couple more of us on. We talk a little bit more about it on your show. So,
sure thing. Would love it, and we will be in touch.
All right. Thank you very much.
All right, John Burroughs, Be sure to get the book, Weaponization of an Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon, the Rendlesham Forest UAP Incident 40 Years Later. Short title there. This is Margie Kay with the next news. I'll see you here again next week.